This is a creepy story about a young girl who was not allowed to leave her house on October 10th of every single year. This girl's mother would literally mark this date down on their calendar every single year so they would never forget. And if the girl had school that day, she wasn't allowed to go. Her mother would never tell her exactly why she wasn't allowed to leave her house that day. It was sort of a mystery. She just told her daughter to stay in a room with no windows and to never answer the door no matter what. And every year as they sat hiding in the dark, they would hear their doorbell ring over and over and over again and would hear tapping on the windows all over their house. It was like something was desperately trying to get in. But by the time midnight hit and it was October 11th, all of the knocking, all of the tapping would stop. Well, one year her mother was on a work trip and the girl was all alone in the house. So her mother called her on October 9th and reminded her that she needed to lock all the doors, close all the windows, and hide inside all day like she was used to. Well, since this was the first time this girl was ever alone on October 10th, she decided that she would actually answer the door to see who had been trying to get into her house for the past 16 years. Well, the doorbell started ringing around 4 in the morning, so she slowly walked over to the door feeling a little hesitant and anxious to answer it, but she finally got the courage to do it. Well, when she finally opened the door, she was face to face with this tall, gangly woman with droopy skin all over her face and her body. Her skin was so thin that she literally resembled a skeleton, and she just stood there pointing inside the house with her mouth wide open. The girl immediately closed the door and ran into her bedroom. She called her mother, told her what happened, and demanded answers. She wanted to know who this woman was. It was time to find out. Her mother told her that 50 years ago there was a mother and daughter that were living in the house before them, and on the night of October 10th there was a terrible fire and they both perished. Now, police and firefighters were only able to find the body of the mother and not the child. So every year on October 10th, her spirit tries to get into the house so she can search for her little girl. This is why you should never use a sleep recorder app on your phone. Now, sleep recorder apps are typically used to track sleep talking or to see how much you're snoring at night, or basically to just record any sounds that you're not aware of when you're unconscious. So I found a couple really creepy stories of people who use this app, and they ended up hearing some pretty terrifying things. There was this girl named Jenny who talked a lot in her sleep, so she downloaded the app to record herself. And one day when she played back her previous night's sleep, she heard the unmistakable sound of a male voice talking to her. So in her sleep, she asked, "What are you doing?" And then a male voice answered, "Nothing." Then a couple minutes of silence go by on the app, and then suddenly the male's voice says, "I'm dead." She thought that maybe someone had broken into her house, but when she ran around to look for any forced entry, she couldn't find anything. There was another user who said he woke up and checked his sleep app, and it showed that he was talking in an unknown, creepy sounding language all throughout the night. He said he was only able to speak English and literally doesn't know any other language. So he was completely freaked out, and what was even creepier is that he was whispering the whole time. There's another story about this family in Chicago that was experiencing a ton of paranormal activity in their house. It was all through the night. They would hear random knocks, scratching sounds, and I'm going to read an actual quote from one of the family members who said, "A lot of the time when you go up the stairs, you feel something following you and getting really close to your ankles." Well, one night they decided to set up the sleep recording app, and when they woke up in the morning, they did catch all of these various howls throughout the night. And the thing was, the howls didn't sound far off, like maybe dogs in the neighborhood. It was so loud that the howling seemed like it was actually in their room, which is super creepy.
Unless you've heard this story, there's no way you could have guessed what was on that ship. In 2012, an old Russian cruise liner was being towed to the Caribbean to be used for scrap when the tow line snapped. They tried to recover it, but it drifted into international waters and everybody just kind of assumed it would sink, so they said, forget about it. It didn't sink, because a year later they got a GPS signal from the unmanned ship showing that it had drifted nearly 2/3 of the way across the Atlantic and was now poised to strike the British coastline. At first, British authorities were not concerned with the damage this ship might cause to their coastline until scientists revealed what was on the ship.
It was being towed to the Caribbean last year when it came loose during a storm. It's now feared to be infested with cannibal rats on board who, lacking a food source, have turned on each other.
In 1983, a young boy was camping with his family on Roan Mountain in North Carolina when his mom asked him to head on down the path and get some water from the well. When the boy didn't return, his mom went to check on him and he was gone. A massive search party was launched to find him, but with temperatures rapidly dropping and finding no trace of him, the family braced for the worst. Then, miraculously, on the 7th day of the search, the boy shows up on the mountaintop in an area they had already searched, healthy and clean. When they asked the boy, "Where have you been?" he said he had been at the well when a tall, faceless man showed up behind him, scooped him up, and brought him to the top of the mountain where he kept him in his cabin all week. After the boy gave a very detailed description of exactly where this cabin was on the mountain, the police were eager to go find it and confront this guy. But the park superintendent just raised his hand and said, "Guys, it's pointless. I've worked here 40 years. There are no cabins on Roan Mountain." Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. In 2010, a couple renting a cabin in the middle of the woods finds the guest logbook tucked underneath the bed in the bedroom. After reading through it, they decide to call the cops. The final 5 entries are all by the same man. The first 2 are just talking about how great it is to be on vacation with his girlfriend. Then it starts to get weird. In the 3rd entry, he describes a stranger lurking in the tree line that doesn't respond to his waves. In the 4th entry, he hears knocking on the windows in the middle of the night, but no one's there. In his 5th and final entry, his handwriting is barely legible, and it just says, "It's in the bathroom, we're going to die." The police show up and find the girlfriend's body in the basement. Next to her body was her purse, and in her purse was her phone. When they open it up, they see that she texted her mother one last time, and it just says, "Mike's starting to act crazy. I think he's off his meds again." There is no way you can predict the ending to this one. In 1900, a man arrived on a little island off the coast of Scotland to relieve one of the 3 lighthouse workers that was there. As he neared the lighthouse, he saw the iron railings had been folded and ripped out of the concrete, and a big boulder that sat out front had moved. When he reached the lighthouse, the door was open, and inside there were half-eaten bowls of food sitting on the table, chairs flipped over, no sign of the 3 men, but there was one clue: their logbook. In the last few entries of the logbook, one of the men describes the winds outside as being more severe than anything he's seen in 20 years. He also says they've been crying and praying for the storm to stop. But why would 3 highly experienced lighthouse workers that have probably ridden out dozens of bad storms before, and they were in a brand new lighthouse that was considered safe, be crying and praying for this particular storm to end? The very last thing they wrote before they disappeared without a trace was, "Storm ended, sea is calm, God is over all." Except here's the problem: there was never any storm anywhere near their island that week.